Welcome, welcome, one and all, to another episode of Witness Titanic. I'm your chairman, James Penca. A special welcome to all my patrons out there. We've got a lovely little crew going on Patreon. If you're looking to talk about Titanic with some terribly nice people, we've got a really nice group going. If you're a mean person, don't join us. We're doing really well. Hi, everybody. It's really late, if you couldn't tell. I've been up late working on episode 40, which you've all heard already. It's going up tomorrow morning. Sometimes these things happen at the finish line for me, and that's this one. I'm so proud of it. I hope you all loved it. What a joy to have everybody out on the Queen Mary, to have that audience, to talk about one of my favorite Survivor stories, and then putting the episode together, watching the clips back. It just made me miss the Queen Mary. It made me miss all our friends that we made that weekend. So please join us next year. But without further ado, folks, let's get into this episode. This episode was not planned, really. I boarded the Queen Mary for the anniversary weekend, intending to do my Abelseth episode. And I had in my back pocket that at some point I was just going to pull one of the many incredible Titanic people on the ship and say, hey, do you want to sit down for an hour and do like a quick Witness Titanic episode? And I was just so busy the whole time, it never happened. But then we had this Q&A with Don Lynch and Ken Marschall, Titanic legends. And afterwards, I went up to them and I said, hey, this was so wonderful. It was such a wonderful hour of questions. Everyone in the room loved hearing from you both. And there's just so many people at home who couldn't come all the way out here for this event. Can I put this up as an episode of my podcast? And they both said yes, very kindly. So very excited to bring you this Q&A as an episode, somewhat. But a little bit of preface, because there's something I need to tell you about before you listen to this, so something makes sense. First of all, let me just tell you who these two are, because some of you at home might not know why we would call Don Lynch and Ken Marschall to be witnesses on this podcast. There's literally a million reasons why. There's so many people you could have on a podcast. Maybe they dove to Titanic and they could tell you about that. Maybe they wrote a book about Titanic. Maybe they were part of James Cameron's film. Maybe they were part of some special documentaries. Well, these two did all of those things. Like, these guys I could call them to do 5 episodes each and we wouldn't run out of stuff to talk about. So as you'll hear in this Q&A, we cover a whole bunch. So let me tell you just a little bit about who these guys are. So starting with Don Lynch, he is the historian for the Titanic Historical Society. He co-wrote with Ken a book called Titanic, An Illustrated History, back in 1992. That book, Titanic, An Illustrated History, it is like a staple of staples in Titanic libraries. I've had my copy forever, as I talk about in the episode. That book is everywhere. It's one of the most essential. Like, if you're looking for your next book for your library, you don't have a Titanic library until that book is in it, and I am not exaggerating. Don was also, he's been in a million documentaries. He's worked on a million Titanic projects. He's written more books than just that one. But he was asked by James Cameron to help with the Titanic movie in 1997. He was one of the historians on that, and he was lucky enough to be asked to be an extra in the movie. If you recall the scene where the little boy, the Spedden boy, he's spinning a top on deck. This is right when Jack is sneaking into first class and he steals that coat, and then he goes and finds Rose and they go in the gymnasium. When the boy is spinning the top, Don is sort of his father. So he plays Frederick Spedden, I believe. So that's Don Lynch in the movie. He was also asked by James Cameron to play Thomas Andrews in the Ghosts of the Abyss movie. So you also saw him in that. But he's been to the wreck multiple times. He went in 2001 with James Cameron. He went in 2005 with the Discovery Channel when they did this like live from the bottom of the ocean thing, like a live stream thing. I think it's on YouTube. It's a pretty wild thing to watch. But he's just done so much to talk about with just him. But we also have on the same episode Ken Marschall. Of course, he co-authored Titanic, An Illustrated History. But Ken's main thing, if you don't know, he is the leading #1, no one's even close, leading artist surrounding Titanic and other ocean liners and ships. If you've ever seen a painting of Titanic, Ken probably was the illustrator of that painting. He was Bob Ballard's go-to guy for making the wreck imagery. Before we could take good photos of the wreck in the 80s, Ken Marschall was bringing it to the world. His paintings are a big reason why we have some of the imagery of the wreck early on, before we were able to figure out how to take photos that deep underwater. He was also integral to the Titanic 1997 film, particularly the visual element. There's so many moments from the film that are very clearly inspired by Ken's paintings. If you ever, you'll see some of his paintings when you Google him after this episode, and you'll go, oh my gosh, yeah, totally, this makes sense. He was also in Ghost of the Abyss. He played Bruce Ismay, which is fun. He's been in countless documentaries, and he's also been to the wreck a bunch of times as well, same as Don in 2001 and 2005, but he also went before Don did on a separate expedition with RMST. So much to talk to them about, and we cover all of that, believe it or not, in this Q&A live from the Queen Mary. But there's one story that you need to know before we listen to this recording, because there's a moment where they touch on a story that they had just told in the previous presentation. And so the whole room knows this story, but you won't know this story, so it won't make sense. So I have to tell you about it right now. This is such an incredible story, and of course it's Don and Ken's story to tell, and they tell it so well, but I'll just try to tell it very quickly, and that is that they went to Titanic on an expedition with James Cameron in 2001 in the summer, and there was a day where they got into the submersible and they went down to Titanic, and while they were down there, the crew on I assume the Keldysh, the ship up on the surface, let them know that something pretty significant took place. I think James Cameron asked them, are you asking us to come up? Like, is there something wrong that we need to come up? And they said, no, you don't have to. Because as you may know, to get down to the wreck, it takes, hours to descend. And you usually stay down there for 10 hours, 12 hours at a time, because you need to make the most of your trip because it takes so long to get there. So to come all the way back up, should we come back up? They said, no, stay down there. So they continued their exploration of the wreck for the next 10 or so hours. They took their photos, they did their research, and then they returned to the ship. And when they got up, they said, okay, what happened? And that day happened to be September 11th of 2001. So you could argue these men who were on these submersibles that day were some of the last people to hear the news of 9/11. But they did tell that story before this, so now you'll hear that they'll touch on it without any explanation, and I didn't want you to be confused. So with all of that, again, thank you for listening. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to my non-patrons. You're all fantastic. Please enjoy this fantastic hour of my life. It was just an honor to share the stage with them, and it will be an honor to share the mic with them here with you. So please enjoy episode 41 of Witness Titanic, featuring two of the most incredible witnesses that we will ever have on this podcast, Ken Marschall and Don Lynch. Folks, this is something I've been very much looking forward to. I know a lot of you have as well. I know when someone like Don Lynch or someone like Ken Marschall is added to a list of presenters for an exhibit, a big rush of people tend to buy tickets immediately after that news, because these two are big names in our weird little world. So. It's an honor, if I may say, an honor to be up here with you guys and to see a list of people that includes all these presenters here, you, myself. It's just, it's so gracious of you to give your time to us. So now this is yours and my opportunity to take advantage of that time and ask you some questions. Certainly, these two were integral parts of the 1997 film, but they are also Titanic legends in their own right because of things like this. This is Titanic, an Illustrated History, a copy of the book that I have had since I was 7, I think. I might have saw the film and then got this.
It's pretty dog-eared.
Yes, it's the dust jacket is long gone. But how many of you have had this book in your life at some point? Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Every hand went up, basically. So we'll talk about this in a second. I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions just to get it going, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and I'll run around with this microphone and make sure that everybody gets their questions asked. So, first question. I like to, whenever I talk to Titanic people, I like to ask this, because this is partially a rec talk, partially a movie talk potentially, but it is also a you talk. I'm sure people here would love to know, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what is your very first memory of Titanic? When was the earliest memory where you heard the name or heard the story or saw the ship?
Well, I'm going to say it was probably, well, I remember seeing it in the encyclopedia and reading about how people were, using the gymnasium. And of course, as a child, and thinking like the school, I'm thinking it was like a trapeze or something, but I want to say that might have been before, but after that, it would have been the 1953 movie on Saturday afternoon on movie, on TV, broadcast TV of all things.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I really don't have any first memory. My family had a set of like 1960 edition encyclopedias, the World Book Encyclopedia, and I remember somehow somebody said, "Oh, look at this sinking ship," and you turn to Titanic and there's half a page, and it had the Willy Stover rendering that was done in 1912, and incredible, and to this day, basically the most dramatic view of the sinking ship. Totally hypothetical, and it looks like daylight, and it's silly, but it is just so damn dramatic. And I remember seeing that, and then the movie Titanic was on television, the same one he just referred to, 1953. And I watched that around maybe 1965, and I was about 14 years old, and that really stuck in my mind. And to this day, I still think that is one of the better movies because of the drama and the emotion and the acting. The sets, no, but the story itself was just very gripping to me.
I find it very interesting that we have a historian, author type, and an artist type, and your answer was encyclopedia, and your answer was a photo, a picture. Of course, an artistic rendering. That makes total sense. What was, I've always wanted to ask you both this, what was your first memory of each other? When did you first cross paths in Titanic? Obviously, you ended up creating this for all of us, and you kind of are linked together, in my mind at least. When did you first cross paths?
So I tell it? Sure. I mean, it's going to be 50 years this year. I was in touch with Rusty Brown, the authoress who wrote The Titanic, the Psychic, and the Sea. And anyway, if anybody's familiar with that, great, good for you. I actually met somebody who remembered her here, but he's gone. But anyway, and so we were corresponding, and she had written this book, and she said, "I'd love it if you came and kind of proofread or whatever. Why don't you come down?" And it was like, and I was in college, but I think I got a ticket as like a graduation gift from high school that I'd never gotten, that kind of thing. And so once I'd done that, she didn't know what to do with me, but she knew Ken, and I knew of Ken, and we might have just changed the letter.
She asked me to illustrate the cover of her book.
Yeah, a beautiful illustration.
Is this working? Is the mic working?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul's work.
So she kind of dumped me on him, to go stay with him for a few days to get rid of this, 19-year-old that, she was done with. And I'm exaggerating because, of course, Rusty and I were very good friends, and after I moved to California, I was living in Washington then, but after I moved to California, of course, stayed in touch with her and with Ken and everybody. And so, but that was how I first met you, and you were living out in the high desert. Or
Canyon country near Newhall, Valencia, Magic Mountain.
And then at some point, you both created this book that's been very important for many a coffee table, and very important in many Titanic libraries, such as my own. Do you have any memories or thoughts or feelings about this book? Are you particularly proud of this book? Do you wish you could rewrite this book? How do you feel about this creation?
The way I feel today is that yesterday when I went to get a sandwich here in the shop and half the people in line had that book under their arm, what a rush. I mean, my guy, as an author or whatever, it's been out for over 30 years. And it's like, and I'm standing here and all these people have it under their arm. And that was just so cool for me. So today that's my feeling about it. It's like, wow, after all these years and this many people, well, of course it's a specialty group, but still, that I was impressed and I was pleased, and thank you for every single person who showed up in the sandwich shop with a copy of Illustrated History under your arm. Yeah. You impressed me greatly.
Ken, any thoughts on the book?
Well, I had illustrated Bob Ballard's Discovery of the Titanic book, and then after that, the children's book Exploring the Titanic, where it actually was a painting of mine on the cover. Mm-hmm. So these were nice little feathers in my cap. But then Madison Press Books approached us and wanted to do what they called a major coffee table picture book, mm-hmm. and wanted to commission me to do a number of new paintings for the book. So this was a really big, exciting job. And I don't know if we should go into the moment where you kind of were hesitant about.
I think you should.
This happens. This happens with any project, most projects, it seems, in my opinion. Where you have a little bit of a conflict with the publisher. The publisher or the editor wants to know, we want to do the spread this way. We want to have it be a triple page. And I'm saying, but the format should be more of a double page, and we'll argue back and forth and so forth. And there was a little bit of that. I went through that with the paintings, of course, the scale of the paintings. I painted certain scenes that I thought were going to be full page, and they ended up being a little quarter page thing or something. What the hell did you do? I've got so much detail in it.
For just a brief second, is that my take on that, and I'll just real quick, is that they had done Bob Ballard's book, so they thought they knew, what people wanted with the Titanic. We had been involved with Titanic enthusiasts, such as, or Titaniacs as they're now known, like you, and through the Historical Society for years. We knew what interested people about the Titanic. They thought they knew, we thought we knew. So, hey.
It got to the place where one day or one evening, Don just said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I am so sick of these. They want to take this book in a totally different direction. It's not what I wanted to do. It's not the book I always wanted to write for years and years. And I remember just saying, just hang in there. You will not regret this. This will be a fabulous thing, and it'll be a launching pad for a lot of great things in the future. And just hang in there.
I've always felt when people have asked me, like, I want to get into this a bit more. What book should I get? This is the first one that comes out of my mouth because it's the perfect length to info to art. You just get the full story. It's not overwhelming. It's not this thick and no photos, but it's also not a kid's book. It's just such a perfect way to digest the story. So kudos to you both for a book that means a whole lot to all of us. To move on to Titanic, to diving to Titanic, I just have two questions, and then I'll relinquish my time to everybody else. You talked, Don, about your first time jitters. Ken, I'd love to hear about your first time jitters as well. But in that answer, I'd also love to hear from you both. When somebody, I assume James Cameron, when he says to you, what would be great? You should come down to the ship. Do you remember that conversation and your first thought of what? Or were you totally ready to go? Because I know if someone asked me, I'd be terrified immediately, and then I'd have to think about it.
Okay, well, in my case, I had already dived in 2000, a year before Jim invited me out for that first one. So I went out on an RMST recovery operation. I was invited. Again, another long story, but anyway, George Tulloch had invited me on repeated dives. And because I was an honor member of the Titanic Historical Society, and still am, all these years later, and the officials in charge of the Titanic Historical Society were vehemently anti-recovery. Mm-hmm. And quietly inside, I kept quiet. Bob Ballard, of course, was intimately involved with the Titanic Historical Society, and he was vehemently anti-recovery, or at least he quickly became so after initially wanting to recover some wine bottles and things like that because he's a wine connoisseur. But he thought better of it, and he took on the political stance, no, I've decided I'm going to be against recovery, and he stuck to that, and he still is today. So I had this anti-recovery thing, that this political line that I was trying to toe, and George Tulloch kept inviting me. And like twice, I politely declined. I said it's going to be political suicide for me to try to go out on I'd lose. Bob Ballard would never speak to me again. I won't get any more painting commissions. THS will kick me out of the society or whatever. But finally, I was told at this point, George Tulloch, I think, had passed away, and it was Arnie Geller was in charge of RMST. And I was again invited, and I was told, Ken, this is probably the last time we're going to be going out, and we just wanted to invite you one more time. So long story short, I finally decided, okay, I'm just going to buck up and agree. This might be my only chance to dive, to see the ship with my own two eyeballs. And I actually sent a letter to Ed and Karen Commuta saying, I'm sorry, but I had to accept this invitation, and I'm going. And I got this very gracious reply saying, we don't blame you. We understand how you feel. We have a disagreement about this, but you do you.
And I'm sure they disagreed on the artifact part, but seeing Titanic with your own two eyes, right, I doubt they could disagree with. I think that's something that means a lot.
I had already been out there.
Yeah.
And so working with Jim intimately on the movie and so forth, when this expedition for Ghosts of the Abyss was being planned, it was kind of understood from the get-go that I was going to be part of the team. So you were asking about my jitters.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time, which was the year before, I do have a little bit of claustrophobia. And you look at this little hatch that you got to climb down through after you remove your shoes and everything, and you get in this little sphere with two other adult people, and you just think, oh my Lord. You just kind of put it out of your mind. And eventually I got comfortable, and it became just like going to work every dive. It was all business. People ask me, what did you think when you first saw the Titanic? Well, in the year 2000, on this recovery expedition, I already was so familiar with the wreck that from doing the paintings for Bob Ballard's book, that I basically knew it from stem to stern, and it was just like going to work for me. There were no big surprises. There was no big emotional thing with me. It's hard to explain. You would think it would be. And as my entire life, basically, my entire adult life since high school has been somehow orbiting around Titanic, you would think that this would have been a gigantic crescendo catharsis moment. But believe it or not, I've never had a dream about Titanic. I'm not lying. Never. I wish I could, because I could be there. I would know exactly what it was like. Like Matt and everybody with THG, you're so familiar with what the ship looks like. It just hasn't happened, with me. But it was, I saw the bow, and again, it was Victor Nisheta, I think is his name. He was the pilot for that first dive, and he pointed out, we came in on the bow, this is bow. And Pat Klein was my dive partner on that dive, and, he was shooting his own video and stuff like that. And I'm sure my reaction was pretty, boring for Victor, because I wasn't jumping up and down or crying or anything like that. It was just like, oh, look, an enemy is growing there on the railing. So,
your paintings are so true to life that when you saw the true to life, you were like, yeah, I see that all the time. That's pretty cool.
There were no great surprises. There were a couple of moments where I saw some little detail in the wreck, in the bow section, a deck light hidden down behind the forward cargo cranes in the forward well deck, that had a protective grill over this bulkhead light. Had no idea those lights were there.
Yeah.
So that, to me, was a really big.
That's a thrill.
And it was like Titanic was looking up at me and winking.
Yeah.
And saying, "This is for you, Ken. Nobody else knows about this light, but you're the first person to recognize it." That was very cool.
That's great. Don, how about you? That first being asked to go.
Well, I like I said, I was nervous and everything, and I remember thinking, I guess I was going to go, but remember talking to George Behe, I think a lot of people here know his books, and he's one of my best friends. And, just saying, I just am so nervous. He goes, Don, he goes, you have to go. You can't not. You'll always regret it. And it's like, yeah, you're right. And so I never expressed until I got there. It was just expressed I was nervous, but I never was not going to go at that point. Jim never knew I was even tempted to not go. But I mean, it was the most incredible experience of my life to do that incredible exploration. And like I said, we were groundbreaking, the first ones to really explore the ship, and then to come back again and do it a few years later. And, and like with you with the deck light, I mean, I loved getting into Dr. Simpson's office in the bow, because it was in the bow, there's still walls because they're metal. And, his desk is there. There are all the jars of medicine on the shelf, things like that. And so, I'm so glad I got to be part of that. And especially in 2001, everybody was just wonderful. I mean, it was the most incredible team. And not so much with the live TV one, 2005, there was a different vibe completely. I mean, we got along, we made it, survived, nobody killed us. But, but at some point, like in 2005, there was sort of this attitude by those people that we were kind of in the way, because it was supposed to be a live thing. And the only live TV you really had, because even reality TV isn't live, or sports, and nobody, back in the day replays sports, that kind of thing. And so they didn't want to have to do all these little side things where they'd have different visuals. They just wanted to show what was happening because that was their background. And so, that one, but 2001 was just incredible. I mean, the people were phenomenal, everybody. And then the Russians were so good to us after 9/11. They really said, you are in our care, and they were no, novices to terrorism or anything, and so they were fantastic.
There was no animosity, no strain, no political undercurrent. Being on a Russian ship with an entirely Russian crew, the whole thing, it was just great. The food was good. They
We didn't eat their food.
They served. What's the word? They served us well. There was one guy, they cooperated, I guess is the word. And after 9/11, that same evening when we came up, there was this one guy, he was the videographer on board, Sergey Kudriashov, I think was his name. And I had spoken to him before. He was a very, very nice guy. But they were a little bit nervous or cautious, some of them, being around the Americans, because this horrible thing. I guess they were afraid that we would somehow blame them or something like that. But I passed Sergey in a corridor afterwards, and he took my hand, and it's hard. It makes me want to tear up. But he just said, he says, we won people. Be strong, like this. And he went like this with his fist. It's like, hang in there, we'll make it through this, as if we were all experiencing it together, which we really were. It was like Don says, it really was a pretty happy family. Compared with 2005, the Discovery Channel live show, there was a lot of stress because of the time constraint. In 2001, we were able to do things kind of at our own pace, and there wasn't the live element.
And I will say one of the things, well, of course, Lori said this, but, in 2005, Louis Abernathy wasn't with us. And in 2001, he spent a lot of time drinking with the Russians. Yeah. And she felt that was a real icebreaker, and that was part of the reason there was such a difference. That was her take.
I'm sure Louis was an icebreaker in general.
Louis is a great guy. I've gotten to be really good friends with Louis Abernathy, and he is a wonderful person. Yeah. I can see why he's one of Jim's best friends. I really can. He's a great guy.
Very funny man. Yeah. My last question, and then it's their turn. If you could go back down, would you? And just theoretically, even if not, what would you need to see? What part of the ship would you go to if you had an hour at the wreck just to see one last thing?
Well, part of me just wants to say anything that hasn't been seen yet. And I think if there was to be another expedition, it probably would involve maybe, smaller robotic cameras to get into other areas. The sea deck, hasn't been explored necessarily, but again, that's the one that's so silty, so it may never be. But personally, because I liked the bow so much, because there was so many defined rooms. It was, to my mind, easier to explore. Like, for example, on the, I realized there's 2 circular staircases for the firemen to go down to the very bottom and go to the fire room or the boiler rooms. And I realized, obviously, one of them is up, one of them is down. That way you're never pushing past someone. But there was a beer bottle in on one of the levels, and so it's like some crew member was drinking during the sinking.
Wow.
And who knows who, we'll never know. But it was just things like that. I just feel like I think maybe explore the bow more if they could, because there is more to see, I think, there.
Sure. Ken?
Yeah, I think there's now, having studied and examined a lot of the fresh imagery that's come back, the 3D stuff in 2022, the photogrammetry, I should say, those models, watching what's on YouTube over and over again, there's a lot more places, I think, even in the stern, which is so nuked and so collapsed and imploded. I think there are places in there that could even be explored at one point in the future. But would I go again? That's really a big question. I've been down 6 times now, and I don't need to go again at all. If in the future at some point, if it were, if Jim asked me as a friend, I need you down there, I really want you down there to help. Yes. But aside from that, I would absolutely hope that somebody else could go in my place and have a chance, because I've already done it way more than anybody has a right to do.
Sure. Don, would you go again?
I'd have to think about it. I mean, I would feel, like I said, I feel safe when Jim's there, because,
Sure.
The Titan thing was, commercial venture, and although these were too, but, it was the first, in 60-some years of deep sea dives and deep sea submersibles, the Titan was the first time anybody ever died.
Yeah.
And I know Jim wouldn't go unless it was perfectly safe.
Of course,
he's not going to play games with anybody's lives. And so if he really wanted me to go, I would certainly consider it. I would seriously consider it. But I'm like Ken, it's like, I've been twice. I'm older now, let somebody else, because there are so many people. And I've always said that about working on the movie. I've always said, if everybody who was into the Titanic could have walked the movie set the way we did, I wish everybody could have. Because I wish I'm not selfish. I want other people to have that same enjoyment that I had. And if there's somebody who wants to go to the Titanic, who that would be their only chance, let them take my seat.
That's great. Well, wonderful. Folks, it is your turn. Do we have any questions for Don and Ken?
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Kat. I think everyone here knows that there's lots of misinformation about Titanic that is very popular. So I'm wondering, what is the one quote-unquote well-known fact about Titanic that just drives you up the wall when you hear someone mention it because it's so wrong?
Well, I can say, Ken isn't on Facebook. I'm on Facebook. So how do you choose one? It's like, oh my gosh, everything from, the life jackets snapped everybody's neck when they jumped off the ship to, the rockets should have been red because that's the distress color used at that time, which, not true. That came later. They insist that the car in the movie is identical to what was on the ship, and we have no idea what the real Renault looked like. I mean, it just goes on and on. I can't pick just one. I had somebody argue with me once because, Molly Brown was also a survivor of the Lusitania, and I know because I wrote about it in high school. And it just, you can't pick. I can't pick one, but my friend here might,
Well, there's obviously the big switch theory. And, how do you explain to somebody who is absolutely dead set in that faith, in that belief that they read somewhere or they've seen it online and they've just, of course, Olympic and Titanic were switched. And how do you explain to them, look, I've been to the wreck 6 times. I know the portholes and the windows and the arrangements of everything. And that is Titanic on the bottom of the North Atlantic. They couldn't have possibly suddenly taken one out of service and switched it with the other without, 2,000 Harlan and Wolff workers. Somebody would have, squealed. You can't keep a secret like that, for decades and decades.
Not from the Irish. No.
Well, how do we know you guys aren't being paid by Big Titanic? Folks, question over on this side while I'm over here.
Yeah, so on that note, hi guys, my name is Dustin. So obviously there have been a lot of conspiracy theories, most of them, if not all of them, decidedly debunked. Is there anything that you go to bed with each night still wondering, but maybe if only we knew something else that could clear up that question? Is there a conspiracy theory in your mind that could exist?
I'm the wrong guy to ask about that, really, because I'm not a historian. Don's the who stood where, who said what happened here and there, the whole social, the crew, all of this stuff, and I'm really just like the rivet guy and the wreck expert, authority, artist kind of guy. So when it comes down to a lot of these conspiracy things, I just haven't paid much attention to them.
Well, I just, off the top of my head, and only because we were having this discussion with someone earlier, I guess at this moment, it's like if we could really resolve who shot whom, it's like, because, there's evidence of shootings of some kind, and not just, where they fired guns in the air. And so what exactly happened? Did someone actually shoot themselves the way a few people claim they saw? And were other people actually shot? I mean, I know that but they only found, a fraction of the bodies, of the people who died. None of them had bullet holes in them that we're aware of. Yeah. But it'd be nice to settle that once and for all.
Yeah, did Fleet spot any other bergs before the big one?
Hi, my name is Zach. So obviously there's been thousands of artifacts that have been brought up since '85. Of all the things that have not been brought up, that have not been found, is there one or two things in your mind that you would like to see found more than any other? Whether it's something that you know is down there, and when you just never found it, or something that could be down there, a photo plate, a lost camera, or whatever it might be. But what hasn't been found that you were like, man, oh man, if we could just find that?
Cameras is a good one. I mean, I've been all over that for decades. Because I wrote to Kodak way back when, long time ago, maybe even before Titanic was discovered, asking, would black and white film in a camera, that kind of film, because they did have roll film, in 1912, if it were, kept in the dark, exposed to seawater for that many years, could there be any latent image that could be recovered from if a camera were ever brought up from Titanic? And the answer that I got back was that yes, there's a good chance that a latent image still remains on that film if it were processed very carefully. And they went through a long, description. It was great, to hear from them. So yeah, to find a camera would be really exciting. Imagine suddenly finding a whole bunch of photographs taken on the voyage, It's that would just be, to me, just so exciting.
Yeah, I think the one I always said in the beginning would be, but I don't think it's reasonable, the sacks of mail. Because all the people who are writing letters on board talking about the voyage and then they mailed them, if we could, but I don't think those are ever going to be found intact. But if you were to find something paper intact inside a suitcase, maybe Jacques Futrelle's short stories that were lost. He had, I think, like 10 short stories. And, he was, a famous writer at the time and sort of considered America's version of Arthur Conan Doyle. Great mystery stories. If you ever get a chance, read them. They're used to be published by Dover. But it'd be cool because they were written, they were done, those were the only copies, and they went down with the ship. And it'd be kind of cool to have, literature from somebody who's been dead for 114 years suddenly, have that again. That would be nice.
There are so many suitcases and steamer trunks down there. You have no idea. And I know that's somebody's personal possessions, but they're not the bodies. They're possessions with things inside that might be very informative, and we might even be able to conceivably return some of these things to their descendants. That would really excite me as well.
So my question is, as kind of technology evolves and new kind of different consumption media forms become available for enjoying the Titanic, and as the wreck gradually decays over time, what things do you guys think will change about the way future generations enjoy and get into the Titanic? What things do you guys think will stay the same compared to past generations?
Oh, that's tough. I think we say robotic images. It may be that the day will come where nobody goes to the Titanic. We just were able to send down robotic cameras, or maybe send an unmanned submersible to send out robotic cameras, things like that. So we may get much more imagery that way. And if they're, again, developed smaller, we might be able to get inside the ship in places that haven't really decayed yet. But on the counter side to that, when you're talking about getting new information, of course, my mind instantly goes to, oh my gosh, AI is just ruining Titanic history for so many people on the internet, because they're creating stories that didn't happen, and images that people, you can look at it and they look kind of fake, and you can tell, but a lot of people believe they're real. And so there's kind of two things going on at the same time. We're going to get better ways of doing physical research at the site, and at the same time we're battling the fake stuff. So it's kind of happening simultaneously.
Yeah, it's just mind-boggling inattention to detail and carelessness that's happening. There was a documentary that was on a few weeks ago. I don't remember the title of it. The damn ship sinks stern first. Yeah. The bow is up in the air, and it's all AI. You see three-funneled Titanics with weird, so many weird decks that are just so bizarre. Or it's in a stormy sea. And I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's the pressure that they're under, the directors, to produce these things, but the inattention that they just can't even be bothered to open a single book. Oh, the thing sank bow first. Hey, we need to redo this thing. It's just really bad stuff. It boggles my mind. And this is coming from somebody who is kind of a perfectionist. I'm a real detail guy, so I'm particularly, perturbed, as my grandmother would say, about carelessness in Ruth Blanchard. Yeah, so provoked. Yeah.
Hello again. My name is Masha. I'm originally from Russia, from that city that you showed in the video. So since little girl, I was touring Keldysh all the time without knowing the history and everything that went with the ship and Mir 1. So in this case, I want to circle back to the stories about Russian and your time working on Keldysh. What was maybe not the favorite memory, but memory that first come in mind? It doesn't have to be best, like working with Russian, working on the ship, on the Mir, how they navigate this very complicated process, and like two different culture working together in such a huge project, very complicated. You show the picture of the second ship. What comes to your mind, like reminding, working on a ship, like, and navigating all of that?
Well, I mean, like I said, I remember just how nice everyone was, and even if you couldn't speak English necessarily, or Russian, and they couldn't speak English, but we'd play volleyball in the afternoon. And Sergey, the videographer, he'd take us and show us videos that he had, even from other projects. And, people were just so nice. We really, even before 9/11, we were guests on their ship, and they just couldn't have been kinder to us in so many ways. And so that's just my overall memory, is just how nice everybody was, even with the language barrier. And I think it was John Bruno talked about how he was sitting with some of the Russians, and one of them just said, one day, your children, my children, friends, something like that. And so, because, I mean, we, obviously as Americans, especially, those of us who remember the Cold War, there's sort of, I don't know if you'd say fear of Russia, but it was always, and there was no visiting it when we were young, that was just very rare, that kind of thing. And so, and we find out that they don't want it to be like that either. The Russians just want us all to get along. That's what the Russian people are about, and it's great. That's my memory, of how I felt about it.
Same for me.
So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for just a lifetime of information. I think I speak on behalf of everybody here. And forgive me, I wasn't here yesterday for the movie discussion, but some of the greatest Titanic videos on YouTube, in my opinion, are when crew from the movie would walk around the set casually without all sort of the fuss. Was there a moment like that for the both of you where you were just alone on the set of the ship?
Every minute. I mean, every minute on this set was just heaven. It just, because we got to go everywhere and see everything, and like I'd be down there, and like John Landau would take me, and he's like, "You've got to see the car. With cars here, come and see it." And Jim would say, "Oh, you're here. Why don't you come in and see the dailies? This kind of stuff." But I, like for me, since I got to be an extra, there's that feeling of having been in the movie as well as having worked on the movie, which has been great. And I mentioned like 9/11, and there's Linda Kearns, who was sitting here in front today. She and I both did our voiceovers the same day at Glen Studios in Hollywood with Gloria Stewart and Danny Nucci. And I always remember that because while we were there, they started, and I assumed it was like some TV show or radio show, but they started playing this recording that Princess Diana had been in some horrible car accident and whatever. And I just remember thinking, well, that isn't very funny. I wonder what show that's for. And then gradually it dawned on me, I think they're playing the news. And so I always remember where I was. I was involved with the movie, not just on 9/11, but the day Diana died, things like that. But I just, the whole experience was just incredible. And it was sad to see it end. It was sad to see the set get destroyed with all the sinking scenes and that sort of stuff. It was just sad when it would rain and the decks would buckle, because it was just a movie set. It wasn't meant to last forever. And, it just kind of broke my heart, when it came to an end. But so this is still special to me to be able to get together with other people who worked on the movie. It made some great friends.
I have to say, this is so fun. It really is. I wish these Q&As could go on for hours, because to me, it's more fun than preparing a presentation and having to, by rote, just, go through a bunch of slides and tell a story. I'm not the best at that, so I really appreciate the Q&As. For me, and a moment where it really hit me, after working with Digital Domain, I was no longer really required to be on, staff on a payroll or anything like that. And so I was welcome to go down to Rosarito Beach and visit the set anytime I wanted, but I didn't have to be down there. And I had other obligations, so I was living up in Redondo Beach, and I would drive down every week or so, or week and a half, and visit the set, see how the construction was going along. And during one visit, the boat deck was really getting built up, and the ventilators were being installed, and the funnels had been installed, or at least the first two had been put up, and they were already all painted and everything, and they got the color of the buff, really good. And Ed Marsh, the videographer, who Don mentioned earlier, do you mind if I follow you around to get your reactions as you see the set for the first time, really coming to, oh, no, sure, no problem. And we were doing a little bit of that walk and talk stuff, and we got up behind the first funnel, and there got to be a moment where he's just got the camera on me, looking at my reactions. And I just said, do you mind if maybe just give me 10 minutes? I just need a moment. And again, it brings me to tears just thinking about it. And he said, oh, God, Ken, of course. you let me know when you're ready. And he disappeared. And I just had a few minutes up there just to stand there and look up at these funnels for the first time in my life and see. Now, they were not the full size. They were not the full scale. They were about 90% of their full scale, because the whole ship was truncated in various bizarre ways to fit the tank and to save on the budget a little bit and all that stuff. So they weren't exactly full scale, but they were big, and they looked really good. And I was just so overcome to think, I'm here in this moment, in 1996. I think it was like early November. No, it was in October. It would have been earlier, yeah. In this moment in my life, I get to stand here, and just how fortunate, now lucky I am. How many people would kill to be in my shoes right now? You know, it's just, it's incredible. And then to walk on the, the grand staircase set, a lot of that they did film, and that ended up, in some documentaries, and walking into the reception room and right on through into the dining saloon. And even though the sets were, again, a little bit truncated, and, but all the walls were really there. They were not wild walls that could be moved aside and hauled away and gotten out of the way for the cameras. These were all solidly built. Every room you could go into, turn 180 degrees, and you were in that room. And then when you saw the actors showing up in their evening finery, well, again,
It was the passengers were arriving for dinner. You felt you were there suddenly. Because I was like me. I kept going. I go up and down the staircase over and over. It's like just descend it, run back to the top, and walk down again. And suddenly this bell rang, and all these people in costume are coming in. It's like, oh my gosh, the passengers are here for dinner. But I saw Rochelle Rose, who played the Countess of Ross for the first time last year. Since then. And she said, I remember how excited you were the first time you were on set. She goes, she still, after all these years, remembered, because that was my first time, was when they were setting up for the dining room scene with the big dinner at the purser's table. And, they were all there and in place. And, well, Gary was too, because Leo wasn't sitting there. But, and she just said, I remember how excited you were.
And Jim introduced us during a break in the filming. Took Don and me around the main large table. They were doing the big dining room scene with Molly Brown at the Kathy Bates at the end of the table and the whole thing. Now, Kate Winslet and Leonardo had left for a cigarette break or something. So they would always leave. So they weren't there. I never met them. But the first person I think that I was introduced to by Jim was Kathy Bates. And she was sitting at the table, and all of a sudden, hey, Kathy, I'd like you to meet, this is Don Lynch and Ken Marschall. Ken Marschall did the paintings, the illustrations that are, and she turned around, oh my goodness, I have that book. Your paintings are just, and she went on and on with compliments like that. And she held my hand, in both of her hands, oh, it's such a wonderful book. And we were introduced to each of these, actors going around the table, except for the main ones, I don't know if Billy Zane was at the table either. I don't remember actually being introduced to him then.
Now I don't remember either. You're right. So maybe he wasn't there either.
But anyway, yeah. Could go on all night.
Well, folks, even though Ken technically gave us permission to extend this Q&A for hours, in your own words, you said it. No, I'd say we have time for one last question.
Hello, good evening. I actually don't have a question. I'm going to spin it on its head, capsize it, if you will. I just want to say thank you to both you, Mr. Marschall, and you, Mr. Lynch, for the literal decades of work that you've done, be it art, research, writing, what have you, for all of us and for countless other people that some of whom probably haven't even be affected by this story and are going to look at your books or your art like so many of us in this room and be inspired and be captivated by the story and be fixated on this subject, this ship, this thing called Titanic, and this incredible story that played out. And so just to put a bow on it, I just want to say on behalf of myself, probably everyone here gathered, and those who are not here, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I can't exactly top that, but I did want to just say on behalf of Paul and myself and the THG guys as well, and just everybody who was a part of this weekend, if there are two Titanic headliners in this world to have come to your event to make it as special as it could be, it would be Don Lynch and Ken Marschall. So one last round of applause for Don and Ken. Thank you both.
Yeah, very. I mean, it really is.